Hi, I'm Joe with JTV. Today we're going to be talking about what makes pearls special and the different varieties, but mostly we're going to talk about farming and farming in the South Seas, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So my personal journey with pearls began when I was quite young, actually. I started in the jewelry business at the age of 17, and I was introduced to Mikimoto cultured pearls, which are fabulous. They're gorgeous pearls. And the first time I held one and really saw what it was, I fell in love. And that love lasted and has lasted my entire career in the jewelry industry. Ironically, I wasn't selling pearls when I was introduced to them. I was in a beautiful art show. I was showing some artistic Art Nouveau jewelry, and someone approached me and said, "Would you be interested in showing people pearls from a very special place, the Philippines, gold and South Sea pearls, and explaining them to the American market?" And I said, "Well, of course, I'd love to do that." So I immediately flew to the pearl farms, as we talked about before, my first time there. And that's where I started to really enjoy and appreciate the quality of South Sea pearls, because most of my career, I would occasionally sell a South Sea strand, but I was mostly selling Akoya strands, which are the most plentiful at the time. And these pearls are really only in the jewelry history, arc of history, very recent, really, when you think about it. Less than 50 years have we had the ability to create these types of pearls. And I was really taken by, again, the amount of passion, commitment, and love that people in the pearl world have for this type of jewelry. And that's what really kept me there and got me really passionate and deeply involved myself. I am considered a certified pearl expert by the Cultured Pearl Association of America. I lecture on pearls. I will tell anybody who wants to listen why these pearls are special. And I've been doing this for quite a while. I've been in the industry. This is my 46th year in the industry. And a large part of that has been devoted to these marvelous things, cultured pearls. One of the did you knows that I like to talk about is, originally pearls were men's jewelry, and men of prominence wore these, and they usually wore them in long strands, and they were usually reserved for the very prominent and powerful people who could afford them, because in the early days of pearling, obviously they were harvested from nature. And then all of a sudden, women started to be really intrigued by them, up until the point where you saw in the Roaring 20s, women would wear very long strands, and they were really accessorizing these with what we call the flapper look. And I think that's where most people, when they conjure up the glamour of pearls, especially pearls that are worn either long in front or actually long down the back, it's one of those things where once it catches fire, it stays that way. Pearls were also called the tears of Aphrodite, which in the earliest days of pearling, the myths and lores that surround them were so fantastic. One special story was Cleopatra said, "I can throw the most expensive banquet in the world, in history." She said this to Mark Antony. And he said, "Oh, prove it." She took a most exquisite, perfect pearl and dropped it in vinegar. It dissolved, and she drank it. That just tells you how prized the pearls are. And you know that there are stories, biblical stories, about the pearl of great price, and how it is so special that you would give up everything just to own that pearl. I relate to that. I believe in that. I think that pearls are that special. I believe that we want to own them because how they make us feel and what it took for them to become what they are. So you know, one of the things that makes me so passionate about pearls was my experience on the pearl farms in the South Seas. I was privileged some years back to be allowed to go into every aspect of pearl farming and culturing. And there's a lot of different ways that you can experience it. There are over 300 steps, individual steps, from beginning to end to create a pearl in the South Sea environment. And if you do any one of those steps incorrectly, like I said before, or you skip a step, you just can't go back and do it again. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of commitment, a lot of passion goes into caring and nurturing for these oysters. And I was first introduced to them on the actual farms. So you visit these farms only one way you can. Well, you could go by boat, but that would take a long time. I flew by helicopter over these farms, landed on the islands, and out in the water you see all these lines, and all these lines have baskets hanging from them, and the baskets have the oysters in them. And in the water are divers who are constantly tending to these baskets. They have to be turned every day, they have to be cleaned, and they have to be protected. Interesting thing, a lot of natural predation goes on in these waters, and we might lose some valuable oysters because there are a lot of sea life that love oysters. You have crabs, you have sharks, you have eels. They all love these tasty, beautiful oysters. I can't blame them, by the way. They are very delicious. But that's what really makes pearl farming such an incredible, risky thing as far as how will the harvest turn out. We don't often talk about that. So my first trip was, I was put on the boat from the island, landed on the island, went out to the baskets and watched them pull the baskets out of the water with special hoses. They would hose down the larger sea life that sort of clings to these oysters. Then they would take them out of the water, bring them to shore, and then you have to clean them underwater, running seawater, by hand with a cleaning tool. I did that. Now that was really an amazing experience because here I have this living creature under my hand. I have to be really careful not to hurt or damage this oyster. Even how I handle it has to be handled with care and reverence because I could damage that oyster without even knowing it. So it meant a lot to me that they would let me clean these oysters and they go back into the basket, back into the ocean. Then they showed me the part of harvesting, which is where this pearl comes into play. So the oyster is taken from the ocean, it's put into a sea bath that's a little bit warmer than the ocean itself, and that relaxes the oyster, it opens up, so it's a little calm, it's not traumatized, and they go in and they take a tool and remove from the oyster the pearl. At the moment that this pearl is harvested, they asked me to stand with my hand outstretched, which I did. They removed the pearl from the oyster and placed it in my hand. It was a magic moment because the pearl looked exactly like it does. They did nothing to it. That was the miracle to me of pearls. That's what gave me the passion that stays with me to this day. But there's another part that I experienced which is really amazing. Other than the harvest and watching all these gorgeous pearls come out of these oysters, was how they're actually cultured in the first place. And I think I mentioned before, you have a donor oyster, which is going to give the color to the pearl, and you have the oyster that's going to be the host, that's going to carry the nucleus and create the pearl. That oyster that is donating its mantle tissue into what we call cybos, 10 of them, right then and there, that's the end for that oyster. And it was really a profound moment. The entire room of pearl technicians, when one was in the process of harvesting those cybos to put into the host oysters, the room goes quiet. And everyone respectfully appreciates the sacrifice that oyster gave to create 10 pearls. So for every 10 pearls, one oyster gives its mantle tissue to create them. That's what makes these pearls so special. There's so much commitment by us who touch them and bring them to you, but the oyster really does a lot of that as well, and we're grateful for that. And we're grateful for nature for allowing this to happen in the first place. You know, what's really amazing about pearls, what I love about pearls, is the way they feel. And a lot of how they feel has to do with their weight. I've had the experience of lifting a 20-kilogram bag of South Sea pearls. It's about so big. It is very heavy because you have this nacre, which again we talked about is made of calcium carbonate, aragonite, the crystalline form of calcium carbonate, and conchoilein, which is the natural secretions of the oyster itself. And these pearls, if you could feel them the way I am right now, they are quite substantial. And what's really wonderful about that is when you wear them, you always know you have something really large and beautiful and special on your neck. That's one of the really magical qualities of really, really large South Sea pearls, no matter if they're Australian, no matter if they're Tahitian, no matter if they're Philippine golden pearls. That's what makes them unique. And even the non-nucleated freshwater pearls, the Genesis pearls, they have a great feel because they're all nacre. And nacre is really heavier, much heavier than the nucleus. So when you feel a heavy strand of pearls, that means that there's a lot of nacre present. Something to enjoy for the rest of the pearl's life. One of the most charming things about pearl farming, especially in operations that I've experienced where there are nurseries, is that you'll literally see the pearl technicians singing to the babies. Here's a little piece of trivia for you. The name of a baby oyster is a spat. Just like we think of in the old days, the spats that covered the shoe, same name, same spelling. So a baby oyster, a spat, starts out no bigger than a flake of pepper, but it has to be nurtured and really tended to until it gets large enough to put into the ocean, because it's just too tiny to survive. So in the process, the pearl technicians, mostly women, like I said, are beautifully singing and serenading these oysters. It's the most charming thing to watch. And they're so happy when they do it, because they know that these oysters are getting their happiness too, and they're going to grow up to be beautiful, great pearl producing oysters. That's what I love about the pearl farming process. There's so many different aspects. If you haven't had the privilege of seeing it, oh my goodness, it changes you forever. And it changed me as far as my passion and love for pearls, because my goodness, when you see how much time, care, commitment, and passion it takes to make just one pearl, you understand how special they really are. Let me tell you about life on a pearl farm. Now, my experience generally has been in the South Seas, and most of the pearl farms in the South Seas are based on islands, and the boats leave from the island every morning. In fact, oh golly, in about 12 hours, the boats are going to go out and start caring for those oysters. And right now, halfway around the world, oysters are being busy at work culturing pearls. As we speak, nacre is being deposited on these pearls. But what's life like on a pearl farm? It's a small community, usually 25 or 30 people. You have to have someone who's compassionate, empathetic, and you also have a sense that everyone's working together for the same goal. So you have divers, you have pearl technicians, you have the mechanics who service the boats and the equipment. You're in the middle of the ocean, so there aren't any convenience stores or hardware stores you can go to or supply stores for anything, so you have to supply your own water, your own electricity, your own parts for all of the machinery and boats you're going to use. In fact, it's a little micro city there. The most important thing, though, is you have to cope with the day-to-day isolation of being there. That's where the family comes into play. So a pearl farm is really a family of a lot of committed, passionate people who work at making the most beautiful things in the world. And again, if you know how these are formed and where they come from, you have a completely different view of pearls and why they are special. I had the privilege to be among these folks many times over in many different farms, and I can tell you one thing. They are the most wonderful, committed, beautiful people I've ever met. And I think that comes through in the pearls that they create. So still talking about pearl farming and what it's like to be on a pearl farm, one of the wonderful things about the pearl farming industry, the cultured pearl industry, is that women are typically able to do the work that men are not so good at. Men typically are divers. They're going to be doing the work of keeping the equipment in well-maintained form. But women are better at being technicians to harvesting the pearls or even doing the nucleation of the pearl through the oyster in the first place. And it's created a lot of economic opportunity through the South Pacific region because, frankly, these are great paying jobs. A lot of the people who work on farms are paid quite well to do it, and they attract people who love that lifestyle and who really enjoy being out in nature because you're out in a beautiful place all of the time. In Australia in particular, it's very dangerous work, so it's very well paid for these divers to go into the water, and as I mentioned earlier on, they're on a line. A boat is pulling on the surface, this line, and the diver holds the line, and as he's pulled across the ocean floor, he has to quickly find the oyster, place it in a basket, and keep going until they've collected enough. That's very strictly controlled, by the way, so the environment's not overfished. But typically, the work of making the pearl happen and the technician side of it is done by women. They have the patience, dexterity, and empathy for the oyster. Quite honestly, when I was privileged to touch these oysters and work with them, you can imagine how much care and how much really love you have to handle these living creatures who are about to produce this incredible form of jewelry.